Before the lunch crowd filled the square, before the pigeons gathered near the pretzel cart, a 7-year-old girl with 11 quarters in her pocket did something that would change 2 lives forever. She walked up to a man sitting alone on a bench, a man who looked to her eyes like someone who hadn't eaten in days, and she placed a warm sandwich in his hands. "You looked hungry," she said simply. "My mom says nobody should eat alone." The man stared at the sandwich, then at the girl, then at his own hands, as if he'd forgotten they belonged to him. He hadn't been given anything in 4 decades. Not kindness, not trust, not a single thing without a price attached to it. 30 feet away, 2 men in dark suits stopped walking. They reached for their waistbands, scanning for threats, searching for the angle. Because men like them had been trained to see danger in every gesture. But there was no angle here. Just a little girl who had spent her milk money on a stranger. And the stranger, the one the entire eastern seaboard knew only as Stellan Cade, the man whose name made prosecutors go pale and whose silence made grown men confess, couldn't speak. Because nobody had told this child she should be afraid of him. And nobody had told him that something this small could break through a lifetime of armor. Stellan did not move. He held the sandwich, wrapped in thin deli paper still warm from the grill, and he did nothing. His men waited. The pigeons scattered. A vendor called out prices for roasted nuts. And still, Stellan Cade sat frozen on a bench in Harlow Square, like a man who had just been handed something far heavier than bread and meat. The girl didn't seem to notice. She was already walking back toward a woman standing near the fountain. A woman in a worn coat with a face that carried the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from years of carrying weight that no one else can see. The woman looked at the girl with an expression caught between love and panic. "Calla, where did you go? What did you give that man?" "My sandwich." "He looked sad, Mama." "Baby, you can't just... You said we should help people who look like they need it." The mother closed her eyes. She pressed her daughter's head against her hip and held her there for a moment longer than necessary. Because the girl was right. She had said that. She had said it 100 times. She just hadn't expected her daughter to listen so completely. 20 feet away, Stellan Cade was still holding the sandwich, and for the first time in decades, his hands were trembling. Harlow Square sat in the oldest part of the city, wedged between 2 neighborhoods that had once meant something and now meant less. The fountain at its center had stopped working years ago. A thin layer of green algae clung to the basin where water used to dance. The benches were wrought iron, painted black a decade ago, now chipped to reveal rust underneath like veins beneath skin. It was the kind of place where old men came to feed pigeons that no longer trusted them, where mothers pushed strollers without looking up, where teenagers cut through on their way to somewhere better, never stopping, never sitting, because sitting meant you had nowhere else to be. The buildings around the square told the same story. A hardware store that had closed in 2019. A tailor shop with a faded sign that still promised alterations in 48 hours. A deli called Mancini's that had survived 3 recessions and 2 generations, its windows fogged with steam, its neon sign buzzing with the patience of something that had learned to endure. The autumn air carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a cart near the corner, and beneath it, the faint metallic tang of the subway grates 2 blocks east. The trees in the square were sycamores, tall and mottled, their bark peeling in patches that looked like camouflage. Their leaves had begun to turn, not the bright golds of postcards, but the dull amber of a city autumn, tinged with exhaust and resignation. This was the square where Stellan Cade had been coming for 11 years. Every Thursday, alone. His men knew not to follow him past the entrance. His lawyers knew not to call. His enemies, the few who remained, knew that Thursdays in Harlow Square were sacred, though none of them knew why. Stellan himself had never explained it. He came because this was where his mother had brought him as a boy, before everything, before the money, before the blood, before the title that followed his name like a shadow. She had bought him roasted chestnuts from a cart that no longer existed, and she had told him that he could be anything, anything at all, if he was brave enough to be kind. He had not been kind. He had been something else entirely. And he had not thought about her words in decades. But this square remembered. And every Thursday, for 1 hour, Stellan Cade sat on a bench and let the memory hold him in place. Until today. Today, a 7-year-old girl with loosely braided hair and a coat too thin for the weather had walked up to him and handed him a sandwich. And the memory had cracked, wide open. Calla Renly was 7 years old, and she understood more about the world than most children twice her age. She understood that the electricity bill had to be paid before the water bill, because you could boil water on a hot plate, but you couldn't make light without power. She understood that when her mother said, "I already ate," it usually meant she hadn't. She understood that the red envelope that came on the first of every month was not a birthday card, and that when her mother opened it, she would sit very still for a long time, staring at the numbers like they were written in a language she couldn't translate. The Renleys lived in apartment 4C of a building called the Alder, though no one had called it that in years. The residents just called it the building or home. Or, in the case of Mr. Harmon on the second floor, this God-forsaken place. It sat on the corner of Midland and Croce, 6 stories of brown brick with fire escapes that hadn't been inspected since the Clinton administration, and a boiler that worked only when it wanted to. The apartment itself was small, 1 bedroom, which Calla and her mother shared. A kitchen that was really just a corner with a stove, a bathroom where the faucet dripped in a rhythm Calla had memorized, 3 quick drops, then a pause, then 2 more. The walls were thin enough that Calla could hear Mrs. Aguilar singing to her baby next door, and Mr. Brennan arguing with the television downstairs, and sometimes, late at night, the sound of her mother crying in the kitchen when she thought Calla was asleep. Calla was not always asleep. She had learned to lie very still, to breathe very slowly, and to pretend. Because if her mother knew she was listening, her mother would stop. And Calla understood somehow, in the wordless way children understand things, that her mother needed to cry, that the crying was a kind of release, a pressure valve, and that stopping it would only make things worse. So Calla lay still, and she listened. And in the morning, she pretended she had slept through everything. That morning, the morning of the sandwich, Calla had woken early. Her mother was already gone. A note on the kitchen counter written in the neat cursive that Calla loved read, "Bread in the cabinet. Back by 3. Love you more than the moon." Her mother worked 3 jobs, mornings at a dry cleaner on Hessler Street, pressing shirts and steaming dresses for people who had closets bigger than their apartment. Afternoons at a grocery store, stocking shelves and smiling at customers who never smiled back. And 3 nights a week she cleaned offices in a building downtown, vacuuming, emptying trash cans, wiping desks that would be cluttered again by morning. Calla had done the math once, in her head, the way her father had taught her. Her mother worked 62 hours a week. That was more hours than there were cards in a deck, more than the days in 2 months, more than almost anything Calla could count. And still, it wasn't enough. The rent was $1,140 a month. The electricity was $87. The water was $34. The medical bills, the ones from the hospital, the ones that kept coming even though her father was gone, were $212 a month. And her mother had told her once, in a moment of exhaustion she probably didn't remember, that they still owed more than $14,000. Calla didn't fully understand what $14,000 meant, but she understood that it was a number so big it made her mother's hands shake. So Kala helped in the only ways she could. She never asked for new clothes. She wore her shoes until the soles were smooth as river stones. She turned off every light when she left a room, even the bathroom light, even for a minute. She ate slowly, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she had noticed that when she finished quickly, her mother would give her more, and then have less for herself. And she saved her quarters. Every quarter she found, on the sidewalk, in the couch cushions, in the little dish by the laundromat where people sometimes left change, went into a jar she kept under her bed. A peanut butter jar with a faded label that she had covered with a piece of paper on which she had written, in crayon, Mama's Help Jar. There were 43 quarters in that jar. This morning she had taken 11 of them, not to spend on herself. She had learned something last week, something that had lodged in her chest like a splinter she couldn't remove. She had overheard Mrs. Aguilar talking to the mailman about a man in the square, a man who sat alone every Thursday, who never spoke to anyone, who looked like he had lost something and didn't know where to find it. Maybe he's homeless, Mrs. Aguilar had said. Maybe he has no one. The words had stayed with Kala. Maybe he has no one. She knew what that felt like. Not fully. She had her mother, but partially. She knew the shape of absence. She knew how it sat in a room. She knew how it could make you so quiet that people forgot you were there. So this morning she had taken 11 quarters, walked to Mancini's Deli, and bought the cheapest sandwich on the menu. Turkey on white, no lettuce, no tomato. And she had given it to the loneliest man she could find. She had not known his name. She had not known what he did. She only knew that he looked like someone who needed to be seen. Kala's father had been a man named Theo Renly. He had been tall enough that Kala had to crane her neck to see his face when he stood. And he had hands that were rough from work, but gentle when they touched her hair. He had been a carpenter, not the kind who built mansions or skyscrapers, but the kind who fixed things. Broken porches, leaking roofs, cabinets that wouldn't close. He had smelled like sawdust and coffee and something else she couldn't name, but would recognize anywhere, even now, even 8 months after he was gone. He had died in March. Not suddenly. Not the way people died in movies, with a single moment, a clear before and after. Theo Renly had died slowly, over 7 months, in a hospital bed that cost more per day than their rent. It had started with a cough. Just a cough. Dry, persistent. The kind he blamed on sawdust and allergies and the cold snap that year. But the cough had grown, and the weight had fallen away from him, week by week, like sand through fingers. And by the time the doctors found what was growing inside him, it had already spread too far to stop. Kala had visited him every day after school. Her mother would pick her up, and they would take the bus to St. Albans General, and Kala would sit in the chair beside his bed and tell him about her day. She told him about spelling tests and playground arguments, and the squirrel she had seen on the fire escape. She told him about her dreams. Strange, colorful dreams about flying and talking animals, and once, inexplicably, a giant shoe that sang opera. He had listened to every word. Even when his voice grew too weak to respond, he had listened. His eyes would follow her as she spoke, and sometimes he would squeeze her hand just once, just enough to let her know he was still there. The last thing he ever said to her was this: "Kala, my brave girl, promise me you'll stay kind. The world will try to harden you, but don't let it. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is the bravest thing a person can be." She had promised. She had held his hand and nodded and said, "I promise, Daddy." He had smiled. A small smile, tired but real. And then he had closed his eyes. He died 2 days later at 4:17 in the morning, while Kala was sleeping in her bed at home. Her mother had tried to wake her gently, had tried to find the right words. But there were no right words. There were only the facts. Her father was gone, and he was not coming back, and the world would now be divided into before and after. Calla had not cried at the funeral. She had stood beside her mother in a black dress borrowed from Mrs. Aguilar, and she had watched the coffin lower into the ground, and she had felt something inside her chest turn very still. Not broken. She wouldn't let it break, but changed. Rearranged. Like furniture moved in a room she could no longer recognize. In the months that followed, she had kept her promise. She helped Mrs. Aguilar carry groceries. She gave her last piece of candy to a boy at school who had dropped his in the dirt. She told her mother she wasn't hungry when she was, because her mother looked so tired, and hungry people needed food more than little girls who could wait. She didn't know if her father could see her. She didn't know if promises made to the dying traveled wherever the dead went. But she kept the promise anyway, because keeping it was the only way she knew to keep him close. And now, standing by the fountain in Harlow Square, watching her mother's face shift from panic to something softer, Calla felt the promise in her chest like a warm coal. She had given away her lunch. She would be hungry this afternoon, but the man on the bench had looked so alone. And her father had said kindness was brave, so she had been brave. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the man she had chosen was the last person in the city anyone would call lonely, and the first person in decades to be shattered by a simple act of grace. Stellan Cade had been born in a room above a bakery in the Voronin district 61 years ago to a mother named Mira and a father whose name he no longer spoke. The bakery was gone now. The district had been renamed, rezoned, rebuilt. But Stellan still remembered the smell of bread rising at 4 a.m., the warmth that seeped through the floorboards, the sound of his mother humming while she worked the dough. Mira Cade had been a small woman with large hands, hands that could shape a perfect loaf and wipe tears and deliver a slap to the back of the head when her son talked back. She had come from nothing, a village in the old country whose name had been erased from maps, and she had built something here, in this city, in this cramped apartment above the ovens. She had built a life, and she had taught Stellan, in her quiet, relentless way, that the only currency that mattered was how you treated people when you had nothing to gain. "You give when you have little," she would say, pressing a warm roll into the hands of the homeless man who slept near the alley. "That's when it costs something. That's when it counts." Stellan had believed her, for a while, but his father had taught him something different. His father had taught him that the world was a mouth that swallowed soft things. That kindness was a door people walked through to rob you. That the only protection was power, and the only power was fear. His father had been a man named Victor Cade, and Victor had run a crew in the old district, collecting debts, breaking legs, making problems disappear. He had been brutal and efficient, and utterly without sentiment. And when Stellan was 12 years old, Victor had killed Mira, not with his hands. Victor was too smart for that. He had killed her with years. Years of fear. Years of control. Years of small cruelties that accumulated like snow on a roof until the structure beneath couldn't hold. She had died of a heart attack. That's what the doctor said. That's what went on the paper. But Stellan knew the truth. He had watched his mother shrink over the years, watched her laughter disappear, watched her hands, those large, capable hands, begin to tremble when Victor walked into a room. She had died because something inside her had simply given up. And something inside Stellan had frozen solid. He had taken over his father's crew at 19, after Victor died in a dispute Stellan may or may not have orchestrated. By 25, he had expanded into 3 territories. By 30, he controlled the eastern seaboard's most profitable distribution network. By 40, his name was a sentence no one finished in public. He had become what his father had been, only better. only worse. He had not given anything to anyone in longer than he could measure. Not kindness, not trust, not vulnerability. Everything was transaction. Everything was leverage. Everything was calculated to protect the frozen thing inside him that had once, long ago, been a boy who believed his mother's words about giving when you have little. Until today. Today, a girl had walked up to him. A girl with loosely braided hair and a coat too thin for the weather, and she had handed him a sandwich. And she had said, "You looked hungry, not afraid, not calculating, not wanting something in return, just kind, simply kind, the way his mother had been kind." Stellan sat on the bench in Harlow Square, and he felt something beneath the ice begin to shift. Not melt, not yet, but loosen. A fissure running through decades of carefully maintained coldness. He looked across the square at the girl and her mother. The mother was kneeling now, holding the girl's shoulders, saying something Stellan couldn't hear. The girl was nodding, her face serious, and her eyes clear and watchful. And Stellan Cade, who had not cried since he was 12 years old, felt something hot and unfamiliar prick at the corners of his eyes. He blinked it away. He gripped the sandwich in his hands. And he made a decision that would change everything. Stellan stood. It was not a decision he made consciously. His body simply rose from the bench, as if pulled by something older than thought. His men, Declan and Yuri, waiting near the entrance of the square, stiffened. They had never seen him approach a stranger. They had never seen him move without calculation. But Stellan was not calculating now. He was remembering. He walked across the square slowly, the sandwich still in his hand. The mother saw him coming first. Her body shifted, subtle but unmistakable, placing herself between Stellan and her daughter. A protective reflex. The reflex of someone who had learned that large men approaching meant trouble. Stellan stopped 6 feet away. He held up one hand, palm open, the way you might approach a wounded animal. "I'm not here to frighten you," he said. His voice was low, controlled, stripped of everything except the words themselves. "I wanted to thank your daughter." The mother's shoulders didn't relax, but her eyes flickered with something other than fear. Confusion, maybe. Curiosity. "She shouldn't have done that," the mother said. "I'm sorry if she bothered you." "She didn't bother me." Stellan looked down at the girl. Calla was watching him with those clear, steady eyes, her head tilted slightly, studying him the way children study things they don't yet have words for. "You gave me your lunch," he said to her. Calla nodded. "You looked like you needed it more than me." "Why did you think that?" The girl considered the question. She didn't rush to answer. She thought about it the way her father had taught her to think about things. Carefully, honestly. "Because you were sitting alone," she said finally. "And your eyes looked like my mom's eyes sometimes, when she thinks I'm not watching." The mother inhaled sharply. Her hand moved to her daughter's shoulder. Not to silence her, but to steady herself. Stellan felt something inside him give way. He knelt down, slowly, until his eyes were level with the girl's. His knees pressed into the cold stone of the square. His men, watching from the entrance, exchanged glances. They had never seen Stellan Cade kneel for anyone. "What's your name?" he asked. "Calla. Like the flower." "Calla." He said it slowly, as if testing its weight. "That's a beautiful name. My dad picked it. He said calla lilies grow even in hard places." Stellan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was?" Calla's voice didn't waver. "He died. But he told me to be kind, so I am." The words landed in Stellan's chest like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, disturbing everything. He looked up at the mother. Her eyes were wet now, though she was fighting it. Her jaw was tight, her posture rigid. the posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. "I'd like to buy you both lunch," Stellan said, "to replace what your daughter gave me." "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary." He stood, brushing the dust from his knees. "I'm asking if you'll allow it." The mother hesitated. Her eyes moved to his coat, his shoes, and his hands. She was reading him the way people read strangers in a city that taught you to read everyone. Looking for the angle, looking for the trap. She didn't find one. What she found, though she couldn't name it, was something she recognized. A woundedness. A weight. The look of someone who had been carrying something alone for a very long time. "There's a deli," she said finally. "Mancini's. It's where Calla bought the sandwich." "I know the place?" "You do?" Stellan almost smiled. Almost. "I've been coming to this square for 11 years. I know everything within 3 blocks." He didn't explain why he came. He didn't mention his mother or the chestnuts or the memory that held him here every Thursday like a chain. But something in his voice made the mother nod. "Okay," she said. "Okay. One lunch." Calla reached up and took her mother's hand. Then, with the uncomplicated boldness of a child, she reached out with her other hand towards Stellan. He looked at her small fingers extended in the cold air. And for the first time in years, Stellan Cade took someone's hand without knowing what he would get in return. Mancini's deli was warm and loud and smelled like garlic and fresh bread and decades of neighborhood history pressed into the walls. The counter was scarred wood, polished smooth by generations of elbows. The menu board was handwritten, the prices crossed out and rewritten so many times that some items had become palimpsests of their own history. They sat in a booth near the back. Red vinyl seats, cracked at the edges, a window that looked out onto Midland Street, where traffic moved slowly and pigeons gathered on the awning of the hardware store that had closed years ago. Stellan ordered for the table without asking. He knew the menu. He knew what was good. And he understood, in a way that surprised him, that this woman was too tired to make one more decision today. Soup for the girl, a meatball sub for the mother, coffee, black, for himself, and a second sandwich, wrapped to go, because he had noticed the way the mother's eyes moved to the prices on the board, calculating, subtracting, measuring what she could afford. When the food arrived, Calla ate with the focused attention of a child who had learned not to waste. She didn't rush, but she didn't pause, either. Each bite was deliberate, savored, finished. The mother barely touched her food. She tore off small pieces of bread and moved them around her plate, but her eyes kept drifting. To the window, to the door, to some middle distance that Stellan recognized. The 1,000-yard stare of someone fighting a war no one else could see. "You're not eating," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not hungry." "When did you last eat?" The question was too direct. He saw her flinch, saw the walls go up. But she didn't lie. She was too tired to lie. "Yesterday, lunch." "It's 3 in the afternoon." "I know what time it is." Stellan pushed the sandwich toward her. "Eat. Whatever is wrong, you'll face it better with food in your stomach." She stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her gave way. Not broke, shifted. And she picked up the sandwich and took a bite. They sat in silence while she ate. Calla finished her soup and began drawing on a napkin with a pen the waitress had left behind. She drew a flower, then a house, then 3 stick figures standing in front of the house. When the mother finished half the sandwich, she wrapped the rest in a napkin. Habit. Instinct. Save what you can for later. Stellan didn't comment. He understood the gesture better than she knew. "I don't know your name," she said finally. "Stellan." "I'm Nadia. You've met Calla." "I have?" He looked at the girl, still drawing. "She's remarkable." "She's too kind for her own good. Like her father. Her father. She said he passed. Nadia nodded. The motion was small, controlled. The nod of someone who had practiced not falling apart. 8 months ago. Cancer. He was sick for 7 months before that. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. They're sorry. They don't know what else to say. Neither do I. Most days. She looked out the window. A bus passed, its brakes hissing. A man on a bicycle wove between cars. He left us with nothing. She continued, her voice dropping. Not because he didn't try, he tried so hard, but the medical bills, they swallowed everything. Our savings. His life insurance went to the hospital before he even died. We owe $14,000 to a collection agency that calls twice a day. Sometimes more. Stellan's jaw tightened. Collection agencies. He knew how they operated. He knew the men who ran them, the tactics they used, the way they turned debt into desperation and desperation into profit. We're 3 months behind on rent, Nadia said. The landlord, he's been patient, but there's a limit. And there's this company, Vantage Property Group. They've been buying up buildings in our neighborhood, pushing out tenants. They offered our landlord twice what the building is worth. If we can't pay, he'll sell. And if he sells? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Where would you go? Stellan asked. I don't know. Her voice broke on the last word. I've been applying for assistance, but the waiting lists are months long. I work 60 hours a week, and I can't make the numbers work. I've done the math 100 times. There's no version where we survive. Kala looked up from her drawing. Mama? Nadia forced a smile. It's okay, baby. Finish your picture. But Kala didn't look away. Her eyes moved from her mother to Stellan and back again. And in that gaze, Stellan saw something that pierced him. A child who understood too much, who had grown up too fast, who was carrying weight that no 7-year-old should carry, just like he had. The collection agency, Stellan said quietly. What's it called? Meridian Recovery Services. Stellan knew the name. He knew the man who ran it. A weasel named Cosgrove who had built his business on the suffering of people like Nadia, who bought medical debt for pennies and squeezed families until they broke. And Vantage Property Group. Who's the contact? Nadia shook her head. Why does it matter? They're corporations. You can't fight corporations. Who's the contact? Something in his voice made her answer. A man named Devlin. Raymond Devlin. He came to the building last month. Told everyone we had 60 days to relocate or face legal action. He smiled the whole time. Stellan filed the name away. Raymond Devlin. He would remember it. I don't know why I'm telling you this, Nadia said. She laughed, a short, exhausted sound. You're a stranger. You could be anyone. I could be. But you're not, are you? She looked at him. Really looked. The way she had learned to look at men in a city that taught you to read everyone. You're someone. Stellan didn't answer. Kala sees things, Nadia said. She always has. She looks at people and she knows. I don't know how to explain it. But when she gave you that sandwich, she wasn't being reckless. She chose you. Specifically you. Kala looked up again. Her pen had stopped moving. He was the saddest person in the whole square, she said simply. And sad people need kindness the most. Stellan felt something inside him open wide. And somewhere beneath the ice, something warm began to move. Stellan excused himself and walked outside. The autumn air hit his face, sharp and clarifying. He pulled out his phone, a device he rarely used, because most of his communications were handled through intermediaries, and made 3 calls. The first was to a man named Brennan Orlick, his attorney. Not the corporate attorneys who handled the legitimate businesses, but the one who handled everything else, the one who knew which judges could be persuaded and which regulators could be convinced to look elsewhere. I need information on Meridian Recovery Services, Stellan said. Everything. Who owns them, who funds them, who they owe, and I need it by tonight. That's aggressive. Can you do it? I can do anything. You pay me enough. Good. I also need information on Vantage Property Group, specifically a man named Raymond Devlin. There was a pause. Vantage is connected, Stellan. They've got council members in their pocket. This could get complicated. Complicated is what you're for. Get me the information. He hung up. The second call was to a woman named Saoirse Brennan, no relation to his attorney, who ran the only domestic assistance organization in the city that actually helped people instead of just collecting donations. She owed Stellan a favor from years ago, a favor involving her brother and a situation that could have ended very differently. I need you to take on a case, he said. A widow with a daughter. She's about to lose her housing. I want her fast-tracked for emergency assistance, rental support, whatever you can do. That's not how the system works, Stellan. I'm not asking how it works. I'm asking if you'll do it. Saoirse was quiet for a moment, then, send me her information. I'll see what I can do. You'll do more than see. You'll make it happen. He hung up before she could respond. The third call was to a man named Yuri Volkov, who was standing 30 feet away, watching the entrance to the deli with the patient alertness of someone who had been watching things for a very long time. The woman and the girl inside, Stellan said. I want them protected. Not visibly. Don't frighten them. But I want eyes on them at all times. Their building, their routes, their schedules. If anyone approaches them with intent, I want to know. Yuri nodded. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Stellan put the phone away and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking at the fogged windows of Mancini's. Inside, he could see the shapes of Nadia and Kala in the booth, the mother hunched forward, the daughter still drawing. For decades, he had taken. He had accumulated power and territory and wealth, and he had convinced himself that this was what strength looked like. That his mother's teachings were naive, suitable for a world that no longer existed. But his mother had never told him that kindness was easy. She had told him it was brave, and it had taken a 7-year-old girl with 11 quarters to remind him of the difference. He walked back into the deli. Nadia looked up when he approached the booth. Her face was guarded again, the vulnerability of the confession already being walled away. I have to go, Stellan said, but I want you to take this. He pulled out a card, plain white, no name, just a phone number, and placed it on the table. What is this? A way to reach me. If the collection agency calls again, if Devlin or anyone from Vantage contacts you, if anything happens that frightens you, call that number. Nadia stared at the card. I don't understand. Why would you? Your daughter gave me something today. He looked at Kala, who was watching him with those clear, knowing eyes. Something I didn't know I needed. This is me returning the favor. A sandwich isn't worth. It's worth whatever I decide it's worth. The words were not harsh, but they were final. The words of a man who was not accustomed to being argued with. Nadia picked up the card. She turned it over as if expecting to find something on the back. There was nothing. Who are you? She asked quietly. Stellan considered the question. He could tell her. He could say his full name and watch her face change, watch the recognition and the fear flood in. He had seen that reaction 1,000 times, but he didn't want to see it on her face, or her daughter's. Just someone who was reminded of something important today, he said. Something I forgot a long time ago. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the table beside the card. For Kala's education, he said. Or whatever you need most right now. There's no debt attached, no expectation, just a gift. Nadia's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were $100 bills, 50 of them, $5,000. Her breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. I can't. You can. Stellan's voice was gentle now, gentler than he had allowed it to be in decades. Because I'm not offering it. I'm leaving it. What you do with it is your choice. He looked at Calla one last time. The girl was smiling at him. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind that began somewhere deep and rose slowly to the surface. Thank you for the sandwich, he said to her. You're welcome, Calla said. I hope you feel less sad now. Stellan felt something shift in his chest. Not a crack this time. Something more like light finding its way through a window that had been shuttered for too long. I do, he said. I feel less sad. And for the first time in decades, he was telling the truth. That night, Nadia sat on the edge of the bed she shared with Calla and stared at the envelope on the nightstand. $5,000. She had counted it 3 times. She had held the bills in her hands and felt their weight, and tried to make them real in her mind. $5,000 was 3 months of rent. $5,000 was the collection agency off her back for a while. $5,000 was breathing room, space, the luxury of not calculating every penny between now and catastrophe. She didn't know who Stellan was. She had searched his name on her phone, just Stellan, nothing else, and found nothing. No social media, no news articles, no trace. A man who existed outside the systems that tracked everyone else. She should be frightened. She knew that. A stranger handing you $5,000 in cash was not a normal thing. It was the kind of thing that came with strings, conditions, debts that would be called in later. But when she thought about the way he had looked at Calla, the way his eyes had softened, the way his voice had dropped when he talked about her father, she couldn't find the fear. She found something else instead. Recognition. She had seen it in his face when Calla said he was the saddest person in the square. She had seen the way the words landed, the way he absorbed them without defense. Whatever Stellan was, whoever he was carrying something. Something heavy and old and unhealed. And her daughter, with the uncanny sight that had always been hers, had seen through all of it to the wound beneath. Mama? Calla's voice came from the pillow, sleepy and soft. Yes, baby? Is the man going to help us? Nadia looked at her daughter. Calla's eyes were half closed, her braids loosening against the pillow like dark ribbons. I think so, Nadia said. I think he already has. Good. Calla yawned. He needed to help someone. You can tell. It was making him sick. Not helping. Nadia felt her throat tighten. How do you know that? Because that's what Daddy said. He said when you have help inside you and you don't give it, it turns into something bad. Like food you don't eat. It goes rotten. Nadia had forgotten that conversation. Theo had said it one night at dinner, years ago, explaining to Calla why he always stopped to help strangers with flat tires, always carried granola bars for the homeless, always gave more than they could afford to anyone who asked. Your father was a wise man, Nadia whispered. I know, Calla said. That's why I listened to him. She closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing deepened and slowed. Nadia stayed on the edge of the bed for a long time. She listened to her daughter breathe. She looked at the envelope on the nightstand. She thought about the man in the square, the way he had knelt on the cold stone to meet Calla's eyes. And for the first time in 8 months, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope. Not yet. Hope was too fragile, too easily shattered. But something adjacent to hope. Something that whispered quietly that maybe the universe was not entirely empty of grace. She got up and walked to the door. She checked the lock, once, twice, and then she leaned her forehead against the wood and closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. She didn't know who she was thanking. God, maybe. Theo, maybe. The stranger named Stellan, or maybe just the stubborn, impossible kindness of a 7-year-old girl who had given away her lunch because someone looked sad. 3 days later, Meridian Recovery Services stopped calling. Nadia didn't understand it at first. The calls had been relentless, twice a day, sometimes more, always the same automated voice, always the same threatening language about legal action and wage garnishment and credit destruction. She had learned to recognize the number, had learned to let it ring, had learned to feel her stomach clench every time the phone buzzed in her pocket. But on Thursday, the calls stopped. On Friday, she received a letter. It was from Meridian, but it didn't look like the other letters. This one was short, formal, and almost apologetic. Dear Ms. Renly, after a review of your account, we have determined that your debt has been settled in full. No further payments are required. Please consider this matter closed. She read it 4 times. She called the number on the letterhead and spoke to a representative who confirmed, in a confused tone, that yes, the account had been paid off, and no, she didn't owe anything else. She hung up and sat on the kitchen floor and cried. The next week, she received a call from a woman named Sayersa Brennan, who explained that Nadia had been approved for emergency rental assistance through a program she had never heard of. The assistance would cover her back rent and the next 6 months, giving her time to stabilize. I didn't apply for this, Nadia said. Someone applied on your behalf, Saoirse said. A benefactor who wishes to remain anonymous. I don't understand. Ms. Renly. Saoirse's voice was kind, but firm. There are people in this world who help without asking for credit. I know it's rare. I know it's hard to trust. But I promise you, this assistance comes with no strings. Please accept it. Nadia accepted it. 2 weeks after that, she received a notice that Vantage Property Group had withdrawn their offer on her building. The reason given was vague, something about regulatory concerns and zoning complications. But the result was clear. The building would not be sold. The tenants would not be evicted. She learned, through Mrs. Aguilar's nephew who worked at City Hall, that Raymond Devlin had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his business practices. The details were unclear, but the rumors involved falsified documents, coerced tenants, and a paper trail that led somewhere no one wanted to follow. Nadia didn't ask questions. She didn't try to trace the connections. She understood, in the way that people understand things they can't prove, that these events were not coincidental. Someone was clearing the path in front of her. Someone was removing the obstacles, one by one, like a gardener pulling weeds. And she knew, though she couldn't say how, that the someone was a man named Stellan, who had been given a sandwich by a 7-year-old girl. On a Tuesday evening in early November, Nadia got home from work to find an envelope slipped under her door. No postmark, no return address. Just her name written in a hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a single piece of paper. The hard part is over. The rest is up to you. But you won't be alone. There was no signature, no name, but at the bottom, someone had drawn a small flower. A calla lily. Nadia held the paper against her chest and stood in the doorway of her apartment, looking at the home she had almost lost, the home she would now keep, the home where her daughter was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Mama, Calla looked up. Are you okay? Nadia wiped her eyes. Yes, baby. I'm okay. You're crying. I know. Sometimes people cry when they're happy. Calla considered this. That's weird. Nadia laughed. A real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in months. It is weird. But it's also true. She walked to the table and kissed the top of her daughter's head and sat down beside her. What are you working on? Math. Fractions. Calla made a face. I don't like fractions. Nobody likes fractions. Did Daddy like fractions? Your father loved fractions. He was the only person I ever met who thought they were fun. Calla smiled. Then I'll try to like them. For him. Nadia's heart swelled. She looked at her daughter, this small, fierce, impossibly kind person, and she thought about the man in the square, the way he had knelt to meet Calla's eyes, the way he had said thank you for the sandwich, as if it had been the most valuable thing anyone had ever given him. Maybe it had been. Maybe kindness, offered freely, without expectation, was the most valuable thing anyone could give. 6 months later, on a Thursday afternoon in April, Calla Renly walked through Harlow Square with a paper bag in her hand. The square had changed since autumn. The sycamores were green now, their leaves full and rustling. The fountain, repaired over the winter by a mysterious donation to the Parks Department, was running again, water arcing into the basin where children tossed pennies and made wishes. The benches had been repainted. The hardware store had reopened under new management. Even the pigeons seemed happier, fatter, and less desperate. Calla walked past the fountain, past the pretzel cart, past the spot where she had first seen the sad man on the bench. He was there. Same bench, same dark coat, though lighter now, suitable for spring. Same gray-green eyes, though something in them had shifted, a softness that hadn't been there before. Calla sat down beside him. Hi, she said. Hello, Calla. I brought you something. She opened the paper bag and pulled out a sandwich. Turkey on white. No lettuce, no tomato. The same sandwich she had bought him 6 months ago. Stellan looked at it. Then at her. Then at the sandwich again. You remembered, he said. I remember everything. She handed it to him. He took it carefully, the way you take something precious. How is your mother? He asked. Good, she only works 2 jobs now. She laughs more. She doesn't cry at night anymore. Calla paused. I used to pretend I was asleep, but I wasn't. I heard everything. But now there's nothing to hear. Just quiet. Stellan nodded slowly. Quiet is good. She asks about you sometimes. She calls you the man from the square. She doesn't know your real name. That's probably for the best. Calla considered this. Are you a bad person? The question was direct, the way children's questions always were. No hedging, no softening. Stellan was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the fountain, at the water catching light, at the children running past with their parents. I have done bad things, he said finally, many of them. For a long time, I thought that was the only way to survive. I thought kindness was weakness, and weakness got you killed. But you don't think that anymore? No. He looked at her. A very wise person reminded me that kindness is the bravest thing a person can be. Calla smiled. My daddy said that. I know. You told me. And you listened. I did. They sat together on the bench, the old man and the young girl, the sandwich between them like a bridge. Are you still sad? Calla asked. Stellan thought about the question. He thought about the last 6 months. The things he had done, the systems he had dismantled, the people he had helped without ever showing his face. He thought about the letters he received sometimes, forwarded through channels so complex that no one could trace them. Letters from people whose debts had been forgiven, whose housing had been saved, whose lives had been quietly, invisibly improved. He thought about his mother, Mira, and the way she used to press warm rolls into the hands of strangers. You give when you have little. That's when it costs something. That's when it counts. He had given much in the last 6 months. More than money, time, attention, the weight of his name used for something other than fear. And he had discovered something he hadn't expected. The giving had not made him weaker. It had not diminished him. If anything, it had filled a hollow space that had been empty for so long he had forgotten it existed. Less sad, he said. Every day, a little less. Calla nodded, satisfied. Good. That's how it works. Daddy said healing is like growing a flower. You can't make it go faster. You just have to keep watering it. Your father was a very wise man. I know. She stood up from the bench. I have to go. Mama's waiting. We're going to Mancini's for lunch. It's our tradition now. Every Thursday. Every Thursday? Since you took us there, we go every week. Same booth. Same food. She grinned. Except I get extra soup now, because Mama can afford it. Stellan felt something warm move through him. Not a crack this time. Not emptiness filling. Something else entirely. Something that felt impossibly like wholeness. Enjoy your lunch, Calla. I will. She started to walk away, then stopped. She turned back. Mr. Stellan? Yes? Thank you for helping us. I know you don't want anyone to know, but I know, and Mama knows. And Daddy knows too, wherever he is. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She walked back to the bench and placed it in his hand. I made this for you. You can keep it forever. Then she turned and ran across the square, her braids bouncing, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon in the wind. Stellan watched her go. He watched her reach her mother at the edge of the square, watched Nadia take her hand, and watched them walk together toward Mancini's. Then he looked down at the paper in his hand. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. Crayon on notebook paper, the lines uneven, the proportions imperfect. 3 figures standing in a park. A woman with brown hair, a girl with braids, and a man in a dark coat, sitting on a bench. Above them, in careful purple letters, Calla had written a single word. Friend. Stellan stared at the drawing for a long time. The fountain splashed. The pigeons cooed. The spring sun fell warm and golden across Harlow Square. And Stellan Cade, who had not been called a friend by anyone since he was a boy, folded the paper gently, placed it in his coat pocket, and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother. He thought of the bakery that was gone, the smell of bread rising, the warmth through the floorboards. He thought of the boy he had been before the ice set in, the boy who had believed that kindness mattered, the boy who had watched his mother give when she had nothing, and had learned that this was what strength looked like. He had forgotten that boy for a long time. But a 7-year-old girl with 11 quarters had found him, and brought him home. Stellan opened his eyes. He looked at the square, his mother's square. And for the first time since he was a child, he didn't feel the weight of everything he had done. He felt something else, something that might, in the right light, be called peace. He stood up from the bench. He put his hands in his pockets. He began to walk, not toward the dark car at the edge of the parking lot, where Yuri waited with the engine running, but toward Mancini's, toward the red vinyl booth, toward the woman and the girl who had given him something no amount of power or money could buy. A reason to be kind, a reason to believe that it wasn't too late, a reason to keep going. The bell above the door rang as he walked in. Calla looked up from her soup and smiled. I knew you'd come, she said. And Stellan Cade, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, allowed himself a rare and genuine smile in return. So did I, he said. And he sat down.